What if your wins at work didn't have to stop there? WorkHuman's employee recognition platform is built on the world's largest rewards marketplace, tying recognition for great work to the things that people love outside it. Crush a project? Snag that baking dish you've been eyeing. Hit a milestone? Celebrate with a weekend getaway. With over 1 million gadgets, gift cards, and experiences, something is redeemed for in WorkHuman's in-house store every 3 seconds. Each reward deepens connections, boosts engagement, and helps fuel a culture that knows their work matters and has the receipts to prove it. Head over to workhuman.com to learn more. WorkHuman, a proud supporter of the HR Happy Hour Network. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to the At Work in America show. My name's Steve Boese. I am so excited for today's show. We're taking on a topic that's actually near and dear to our hearts here on the show. We've covered it before, but not for a while. And it's super important, right? It gets to all the things that we care about on this show: opportunity, equity, fairness, and a better workplace for everybody. So we're going to talk a lot today about pay equality, pay transparency, and fairness in the workplace, particularly for women. Our guest today is Noreen Farrell. Noreen is the executive director at Equal Rights Advocates, an expert on these topics, and a really cool person too. And I can't wait to get into this with you. Noreen, first of all, thank you for joining us, and how are you?
Thanks, Steve. I'm good. I'm lots of work these days, given the context, but really work alongside a lot of great HR professionals and advocates, working our way through some tough issues in this context.
Yeah, thank you, Noreen. They are tough issues, but before we dive into, hey, what's really on the front burner, right, for folks who care about these issues, it's because it seems to move fast, right? Especially the last year and a half or so. But maybe tell us, let's step back for a second. Equal Rights Advocates has been around for quite some time, but for folks who may not be familiar, can you tell us a little bit more about the organization and the work you guys do?
Yeah, sure. We've been around for 52 years, and I've been at ERA for 22 years,
Wow.
and doing this work for about 3 decades now. And we're a national organization. We're a nonprofit that is working to make sure that there's gender, racial, and economic justice for everyone, including workers throughout the country. And we do that through great work with employers, with through policy work, enforcement actions. We think it's really important to share what people's rights are, and so we
Mhm.
do a lot of education. And what's really wonderful about our work is we work with, upwards of 500 different partners across the country. And so we can really keep our finger on the pulse of what are the trends bubbling up when we see a headline, what are
Right.
the impacts? And we try to be responsive and make sure that there's enforcement of our employment laws, but also, that our workplaces are keeping up with sort of cultural progress
Mhm.
on the issues that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, thank you, Noreen. I think it's certainly been a period in the U.S., right? And apologies to our international listeners who may not feel the pain of some of these specific issues quite so much where you're at. But here in the U.S., it seems to me, right, that in the last year plus, right, since the new administration's come in, we've had some pretty significant changes, if not to the laws themselves, which I'm feeling we might not have really changed any laws, but changed enforcement postures, things we're emphasizing, just the nature of what's considered, even just baseline terms like fairness, equality, things like that. I know there's a lot going on, Noreen. From your perspective, what are some of the biggest changes and then challenges that have come up that really are hitting these issues directly in the last, year plus?
I think that what we've really seen is that, laws on the books, and they're great laws that have opened up opportunities and created equity in thousands and thousands of workplaces across the country. For as great as they sound on paper, they are not self enforcing. There is a whole infrastructure at both the state and federal level that make rights real, right?
Mhm.
And so I think over the past year, we've seen the ways in which, unchecked, that infrastructure can really be eroded. And making decisions not to actually enforce certain laws, removing guidance that both workers and advocates and employers rely on to help you navigate what
Right.
might be complicated laws. And then also just sort of the chipping away of really important agencies that I think both workers and employers rely on, um, to help support making those rights real in the workplace. And so, in our country, it's coming from the top through the executive branch. It's been a matter of policy
Hmm.
to erode at those rights. And I think our job is to have those checks and balances, both in our workplace policies, in how we're collaborating with each other in our courts. And so I think we're really getting a behind the look at the infrastructure, and how that can weaken and what we should do about it.
Yeah, thank you, Noreen. It's a great point because preparing for the show, and I was like, let me just make sure I know what some of these terms are. And I like, oh, the Civil Rights Act, 1964, right? Title VII, non-discrimination, protected categories. I'm like, I don't think that's changed. I don't recall it being repealed or changed or any law that's different. That's still the same law from 1964, right? But what's happening on the ground is not the same as it was even 5 years ago.
Yeah, and in fact, I think that what's been most concerning is the actual, um, the flipping of language as though it is illegal. So,
Mm,
in our history, we've been in the workplace for 5 decades. We've seen these really common sense, not very controversial policies like diversity, equity, inclusion, making sure that there's training available to all kinds of workers so they can advance. These are the kinds of programs that have been fairly mild in the context of workers' rights work,
yeah.
that have really benefited all workers, including men, including white women, including people of color. And we've really seen this narrative that those are actually discriminatory coming out of the federal government. And so our challenge is
Mhm,
to, not just sort of ride this tide and hope it ends, but to really make sure we're taking back our terms. We're showing how these kinds of programs really work, and to also show what happens when they go away. And I think that we have in our favor right now the tracking of data that
mhm,
has shown what's happened in the workplace since January 2025. Happy to talk about that, but I think that what it's showing
mhm.
should startle us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so, Noreen. I mean, we are seeing a lot of impact in the workforce, particularly hitting the women in the workforce, right? Because it's not just what happens at work too, right? And we could even sort of take a wider lens too. It's what's happening in the greater culture and society. So if things like childcare becomes inaccessible or unaffordable, if elder care, we were talking before the show about caregiving a little bit, caregiving responsibilities tend to fall disproportionately on women who are working and women who are not working too, but on women as well, right? And if they're not getting the supports they need from sort of governmental supports and others, right, then they might be pulled away from work, right? And now we're seeing, and I want to talk about this in maybe a little bit more detail, the the wage gap, which we have been talking about literally forever, right, in sort of workplace conversations, the wage gap between men and women's not. It's actually getting worse, right, for the first time in a really long time. So I feel like it's just one insult after another, particularly landing on women, women of color. But all right, that's a long-winded way of saying like, where are we at right now, right? In terms of you guys at Equal Rights Advocates, we're focusing on this. I know you're focusing on a lot of things, but
Yeah,
this is important right now in light of everything that's going on here in this country.
yeah. Well, maybe I can just give you a little bit of a snapshot
Okay.
and tell you what I'm seeing is happening from our perspective as contributors to some statistics that we're seeing and what we're doing about it. Because if we leave this with nothing else, is that there are plenty of tried and true really clear solutions to what we're seeing that have been working in states across the country that we just need to get back to,
Yeah.
and that are actually supported with people across the political aisle, across employer, advocates, groups. So we track this trend coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics between January and August of 2025. And it was very disturbing. We saw over 455,000 women leaving the workplace. And the two categories of women that left at really unprecedented numbers were Black women
Hmm.
and mothers.
Uh,
And this comes at a time where there were massive terminations of federal employees, and Black women happen to be, a healthy percentage of that.
mhm.
Um, Also, at a time when, despite momentum in certain states to really address childcare needs coming out of the lessons of COVID, for
Yeah.
example, we saw companies going back to from partial remote to everyone having to be back in the office. We saw continued stalls on paid family leave,
Hmm.
on childcare subsidies, on the really basic needs that people have to stay in the workplace. And as you mentioned, the wage gap widened. So the wage gap is the difference between the average earnings of men and women working, usually full time. We also track
Hmm.
part time gaps because we know after COVID, more women went into part time work, not of their choice.
Hmm.
And to a default, no matter what demographic of woman you're talking about, the part-time wage gap is expanding as well. And so we look at childcare needs, we look at just wage equity, and we look at the programs that keep women in the workplace not just in, but
Right.
thriving and advancing and all the things that make it worthwhile to stay in the workforce during a tough time. And on all of those fronts, we are not seeing the commitment we need from Congress and the executive, branch,
Hmm.
exactly. But also, we've seen federal agencies like the EEOC just refusing to really prioritize that. In
Hmm.
fact, I think a dangerous trend is there are great federal agencies that work really hard with workers and employers to come up with guidance. How do we navigate this? What does prevention look like? What does a prompt response
Hmm.
look like? And, many people listening to this podcast may be coming from big companies where they've got their HR machine working, but there are so many smaller employers in this country and smaller businesses that really do rely on this kind of guidance as they're building up their HR programs, as they're thinking about it, as they're hiring.
Sure.
And so it's critically important, I think, that we realign our federal agencies to be supportive of the goals of our civil rights acts for the benefit of workers and employers that look to those agencies. It's also really important that we look at the states that have worked right alongside with employer. I'm here in California right now.
Okay.
We've had great corporate partnerships on pay equity.
Hmm.
Companies like Salesforce, who even
Yeah,
before
pretty
the
famous example, and I think I've reported on that one too. Yeah, I'm familiar with that one,
yeah,
right? They did a real
yeah,
self-audit and made a bunch of compensation adjustments based on some disparities they unearthed right in their own data.
yeah. I think that's an example of there is a cultural zeitgeist that appears to be outpacing work changes and policy changes even. I mean, you think about, Glassdoor, people of a younger generation sharing what they make, what they
Mhm.
left at. I mean, people in our generation, that secrecy was just really entrenched in our culture.
Yeah.
But when we started introducing, for example, pay transparency bills, which are so important because it turns out when people know what other people make, that they advocate for themselves
Mhm.
differently or they ask questions. Okay, well, here's our scale. I'm here. How do I get to the higher scale? Oh, I need that training. Great. Let's organize that. I need that degree. Great. I'll make that happen. And that what came, I think, from a cultural zeitgeist of transparency among a different generation of workers
Yeah.
who were posting their salaries. And today, California was one of the first states to pass pay transparency laws. There were employers that were doing it already before
Mhm.
we passed the law, and now 1 in 4 working women are able to see salary scales across the country. And, these are the kinds of just system changes, like breaking long-standing cultural taboos and
Hmm.
practices that have broke open, I think, what have kept, those gaps really stagnant and widening. So we look at for the pay gap, pay transparency.
Hmm.
We look at whether or not working mothers and other caregivers are supported in the workplace. They don't have to be in and out like yo-yos because that
Right.
impacts your income
Sure.
over
It
time.
sets back your growth and your trajectory, almost always, right? Sure.
And we're looking at, are women and those who've been historically underrepresented, are they making it into the highest wage jobs? And one of the sort of, I think, crystal ball dangers that's happening with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the federal agency that is supposed to enforce our civil rights laws alongside all of us,
Hmm.
they have been talking about getting rid of the requirement that employers track demographic data. So, who's in what jobs by race, class, sex, ethnicity,
Hmm.
that really lets you look at, okay, am I making sure that there's pay, not just pay equity between jobs, but there's pay parity. So
Right.
people have opportunity to make more.
Yeah.
Um, and those are the kinds of things that, in California, our pay gap is closed by about 13% after we've passed about 8 different laws
Hmm.
related to pay equity. Not relying on prior salary when you set your
I was
pay, right?
just thinking about that one, right? There have been a number of jurisdictions that I can recall, right, who've um, uh, outlawed the requirement a candidate supply salary history, right, in an interview
Yeah.
process, right, and often used as, okay, well, if we know the candidate's making X, we can try to give them X plus 5% and get away with that, quote
Yeah.
unquote, even if that's not reflective of the market value of that position. Say,
I mean, I can share an example of that because it was such a common sense fix, but for so long, look, all of us have thought about like, oh, just give them a little bit more. We represented this woman named Aileen Rizzo, and she worked as a math educator
mhm,
in Fresno. And she came in and she was given the county's policy was give $5,000 more than what they made, right?
right,
No matter who it was, if it was a
mhm,
man, woman, they weren't
sure,
thinking about how past salaries might be entrenched in discrimination that have
right,
made them lower. And so she realized that she was making less than someone who, had like 8 years less experience than
mm,
her, brought it up, and it was an interesting case. It actually, it went to the Ninth Circuit. It was under federal law, and the court said, "Yeah, just prior salary is not a job related,
mhm,
condition that lets you
sure,
make them pay less." And so we went ahead and passed that in the state law here in California. Now we've got it in about 17 other states. And it's this practice that actually is also really helping men, because um, we know that I think folks of it, especially in terms of folks that are over 40 and 50, they
mhm,
tend to leave their job less. And so when
mhm,
you leave your job less, you're not getting those usual bumps that
right,
come with changing your job. And so, you might come in having been someplace for 15 years and not in the
mhm,
market raising your. And so it's really helped, for example, older men in tech, understanding, what their value is, seeing those salary ranges. So if they're back into, in the market, they're understanding how things have really changed in
yeah,
certain workplaces. And so these are just really common sense measures that, just a broad range of employers are behind leading. And what's important, I think, is that we have an increasingly national workforce, right? So companies don't necessarily just work in one jurisdiction or another.
right,
So even if federal law is not being enforced or it's weaker, I think the call to action for employers is like, this is a very competitive job market. What is the highest standard that employees are becoming used to in seeing from employers across the country, and keeping that the bar. Um, and
right, versus,
all
right, a classic approach, right, I know it, I've been in employers who sort of operated this way, right, what's the floor, and and let me just be a half step above that, or 3 inches above that floor, and I'll be good. Versus your approach you're talking about, Noreen, which is say, hey, what's they say if California has the strongest laws protecting pay equity, shouldn't I aspire to have that filtered throughout my entire organization, right? Not just where I'm legislatively mandated to do it, right? I think that's a great point. And we saw some of that in COVID, right? And
Yeah.
companies tried to walk away from it. Many did, where when everybody kind of went to remote working, many, companies that could do it and jobs that could do it, um, we had that debate about, well, a software developer in Palo Alto, makes X dollars, and a software developer in Wichita, Kansas makes quite a bit less. And if this remote worker has picked up and moved himself or herself to Wichita, Kansas, should we, cut their pay essentially, right? And many companies did. They did that, which was ludicrous, but they did it anyway. And but saying,
Mhm.
you're thinking, well, why do that, right? Why would you approach the let me do the very least amount possible to be compliant, if you will? And I don't think that's long term a great strategy for an employer, whether it's pay equity or other issues as well.
I think it's also, just to be blunt, it's just not efficient because
Yeah.
an organization like mine, we lead a campaign called Equal Pay Today. We have 60 plus partners in states across the country. We're we're not just moving to change federal law. We have, over the past 13 years, been the force behind 200 stronger pay equity laws throughout the states. We are
Mm,
coming state by state. So
yeah.
if your particular jurisdiction doesn't require it yet, it still will. It,
Yeah.
it soon will,
That,
because we have found that these legal changes are very popular. They're popular with voters. They're
mhm.
popular with workers. We're definitely building state by state momentum for these policies that make sense. And so I feel like, as a matter of efficiency, having the highest floor
Yeah.
is just an efficient way to keep, not only keep workers, but keep running. I don't know. I think you'd save a lot on legal costs trying to figure out all the
Hmm.
jurisdiction requirements. And this momentum is really strong. We have a policy agenda this year in states across the country. So I just think that there's a lot of work to standardize, because we don't think that your rights should depend on your zip code as a worker. And that's sort of
Yeah.
the push that we're doing in our work.
I like that, Noreen, because I think it's a challenge for organizations, but it also represents a really strong opportunity, right? I mean, the, and some organizations will really only react when it's their hands are forced a little bit. And I, for one, think that uh, we're going to see a lot more demand for workers, even more, that even more so in the next 6, 8, 12 months, 18 months. There are some macro kind of labor market trends happening right now in this country. Primarily, the labor force is actually not getting any bigger, which is
That's right.
very, very unusual, right, for this country. And there's a bunch of reasons why, which we don't need to talk about here, but it's not, right. And participation rates are fairly high already, right, for most of the key demographics. So companies are going to have to compete harder for
Yep.
talent. And one of the ways certainly is, hey, we value everyone. We're going to be a company that pays people fairly. We're going to treat people as individuals, as people. We're going to support their needs both inside and outside of work. And these are not soft issues. These are not, woke issues. These are hard business issues. And I think organizations who are not doing these kinds of things, even if the federal government's not forcing you to, so what, right?
Yes.
You should be doing many of these things anyway.
Yeah, I never thought that, we'd have a worker advocate and company front lines
Hmm.
of really great workplaces,
Yeah.
but in a moment where the federal government is deprioritizing that, or, weaponizing that, actually, I think it's a great opportunity for us to stay the course as high road employers. I am an employer myself,
Hmm.
um, and and show how these policies really work. I mean, paid family leave. for men and for women, the ability to care for your family
Yeah.
and not have to choose that before your job. You realize, 3, 4 months out for family care over the course of a career is, you get that back in spades in terms of not having to recruit new
Oh, yeah.
employees and not all the loyalty. So, I think that that's the thing. These are very popular policies that are working in many states. And I think is a moment of confusing messages, frankly, politically.
Mhm.
But we need to kind of keep building on our work since 1964 to
Mhm.
really breathe life into these laws.
Yeah.
Um, and I've been really heartened by all of the likely and unlikely allies in this moment. In that,
Mhm. Noreen, for folks who are, work for employers, mid-sized, large employers, any size employer really listening to this or concerned about these issues, both from a personal level, but also from an organizational level, can they partner with you guys directly? Is it indirectly working on their own initiatives and supporting, legal change? What's the best way employers can be involved in this work aside from doing some of the internal stuff, of course, right? Doing those pay audits in house, making sure you're not disproportionately I don't want to say discriminating is the right word, but your pay structures and your progression paths in the organization are not out of whack. Obviously, there's a lot of internal work you can do. Is there other work they can do? Can they partner with you, or what else can they do?
yeah. I am, for example, a member of the Women's Business Collaborative, and it's a great organization of businesses that are committed to various worker justice issues. And we sit in panels together. We
Hmm.
talk about pain points. Okay, this law passed, but this is the pain point, and it really that dialogue is so important for us to make tweaks and think about amendments and how we approach legal change. That is really helpful. We have an incredible circle of employers that we love to lift up
Hmm.
because they're doing such a great job on a variety of issues that workers care about. We have an action team to support our various pieces of legislation. And so I would just say that any employer that is proud of what
Hmm.
they're doing, who want to give feedback where there's pain points, Equal Rights Advocates is an organization that they can come to, and our work will be better for it.
Yeah.
So we appreciate that.
Yeah, and you can go equalrights.org is the website
Mhm.
too. I was on there this morning. That's a great domain, by the way. That's like that's a equalrights.org. That's
Thank you.
awesome.
That's what happens when you're founded in 1974. You
I
get the
know
early.
when you start. I know every so often someone will tell me, "Hey, how did you get your name at Gmail as your email?" I'm like, "Well, I think Gmail started and I signed up like the next day or something, so that's how you do it." But Noreen, this has been really, really interesting to me and important as well. Like we are
Yeah.
such strong advocates here at our company, but on the show and in the other media we do. In fact, I do a little workplace minute show, which is like 5-minute little commentaries on news of the day. And I just went off hard. I know we didn't talk about this on the show today, but I went off hard on the CEO of AT&T. I'm sure you saw this, who publicly said we need younger workers at this company, and now they're being sued by a couple of folks who for age discrimination who were let go in a series of downsizing efforts. And maybe they'll win, maybe they won't. I don't know. But the fact that you've got people at companies like that, right? Massive employers, a heritage. You don't have to say anything about this. If I don't want them to cut off your phone, or if you're an ATT customer, I'll say it. You can't do that, and that's just one example. It happened to be age discrimination. That could be, if you're willing to say that out loud, there's probably some things you're not willing to say out loud that you're probably thinking. So I think,
Yes, Steve. We are watching closely what's coming from the top from CEOs.
good Lord,
Everything
yeah,
from the assumption that women can't be engineers to asking for a more masculine workplace to a company like SpaceX that's being sued because its CEO has a lot of misogynist imagery that on social media that's affecting his employees.
yeah,
Look, you can make great worker morale a transformational priority of your
mhm,
organization, or you can go the other route at your peril. And so I
I
think it's really important to call that out.
That's a great cap, I think, to the conversation. And yeah, because you could go on for a while. I could start ranting, which probably no one wants to hear. Um, but I do want to ask people to go to equalrights.org, check out the resources and information they have on the website. It's a really cool website. Find what Noreen and their teams are doing, advocate for your own employees, advocate for the people in your community, and advocate for just better workplaces overall. That's what we try to do here on the show and all the shows that we do. And you guys are doing just wonderful work. And I'm so happy we got a chance to chat today, Noreen. It's great to see you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And sign up for the action team because you can hear about what we're doing once a week. We don't bombard people with what's going on around the country. I really appreciate this show, all you're doing, and I look forward to more conversations to come.
Absolutely, Noreen. Thank you so much. So equalrights.org, sign up for the action team. Thanks so much. I want to thank everybody for listening to the show and putting up with me a little bit today. I don't care. We're passionate about these topics, and I hope you are too. So that's it for At Work in America today. My name is Steve Boese. Go to hrhappyhour.net for all the show archives or anywhere you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next time.